Thanks for tuning in to Operation Revenge. Make sure to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Now let's begin the story.
I've always been the invisible one. My name is Meredith Cole. I'm 52 years old. I've spent most of my life being the family's afterthought, the one everyone forgets about. So when I showed up at Travis's promotion banquet, I knew exactly what role I was going to play, the invisible woman in the background. The banquet hall was grand, filled with family, colleagues, and a few people who had probably been invited out of obligation. The clink of glasses and low hum of conversation filled the air. I slipped inside through the back entrance, careful not to make a scene. I was, as usual, unnoticed. Travis was the star tonight. I wore my simple black suit, no flashy insignia, no pins, no medals. I was just a woman who had been excluded, standing quietly by the exit, watching as people moved around me. The soft glow of chandeliers above made the whole room feel a little too bright, a little too perfect. I could hear Travis's laughter echoing from the main room. My brother, the golden child, the one they always talked about. Not that I minded. I was used to it. I hadn't been part of their celebrations in years. I was the one who had been forgotten, the one who had vanished into the shadows of their perfect little world. As I stood there, I caught sight of Lieutenant Commander Elroy Jensen entering. He walked with purpose, his uniform crisp, his presence commanding attention. The room quieted slightly as he made his way toward me. I barely moved, just stood there, hoping for the night to pass in silence. Then, just as he reached my side, Elroy stopped. He turned, his eyes scanning the room for a moment before they landed on me. "Admiral Cole," he said, his voice crisp with respect, as he raised his hand in a salute. The room went still. The sudden silence hit me like a slap. Everyone, including Travis, turned toward me. Their eyes, wide with surprise, darted from Elroy to me, as if they were all trying to piece together the puzzle. My heart thudded in my chest. The weight of their disbelief was palpable. Travis's smile faltered. My parents, my so-called parents, stood frozen, unsure of what to do next. "Admiral?" Travis's voice was barely a whisper, disbelief creeping into his tone. Elroy smiled slightly, glancing at me before turning back to Travis. "Yes, sir, Admiral Meredith Cole. I had the honor of serving under her during the top-secret operation 2 years ago. It's an honor to see her here tonight." The words stung, even though they were the truth. For years, I had stayed silent. They'd pushed me aside, rewritten my story, made me disappear. And now, here I was, exposed for something I had never allowed them to acknowledge. "Admiral?" my father muttered, his face pale. He looked like he had seen a ghost. For a long moment, no one moved. No one spoke. It was as if the world had stopped turning. I felt the eyes of the room burn into me, but I didn't flinch. I stood there quietly, taking in the discomfort that washed over my family, the shame that they couldn't hide. I could feel the weight of their gaze, of all their lies, hanging heavy in the air. They had lied to themselves, to everyone, about me for so long. They had erased my accomplishments, my career, everything I had ever done. And now, in front of all these people, my truth was out. Slowly, I turned away, facing the door. They had no right to feel embarrassed now, but I knew they did. As I stepped out, leaving them behind in that perfect, polished banquet hall, I felt a quiet sense of power wash over me. The truth had found its way to the surface, and there was no hiding it anymore. Thanksgiving, 7 years ago. I remember it vividly. The way the table was set with all the right pieces: golden brown turkey, mashed potatoes with that perfect sheen of gravy, cranberry sauce shaped like the can it came in, my father sitting at the head of the table, beaming with pride over his perfect family, his perfect children. Except for me, I was the shadow in the corner. I hadn't been invited to the table at first. It wasn't unusual. They didn't need me, not really. But when I showed up anyway, as I always did, the looks from my father were all too familiar. The disapproving glance, the one that made me feel small before I even opened my mouth. "Meredith, you made it," my mother said, too cheerfully. She was always the peacekeeper, the one who tried to smooth over the tension, even though it was thick in the air every single holiday. She shot my father a glance, one of those "let's be nice" looks. But I could feel it. I could feel it from both of them. The quiet disdain. I sat down quietly, next to my younger brother Travis. He didn't say anything, as usual. He never did. It was easier for him to let me sit there in silence while he tried to ignore the fact that I wasn't really family, not in their eyes. The conversation that day turned as it always did, to accomplishments. My father made a show of talking about how well Travis was doing with his promotion, his high-profile career, and all the things that made him successful, as if success was something that could only be measured in job titles and accolades. "And Meredith," my father said, casting me a glance, "how's work? You still doing that thing?" The words, "that thing," hung in the air like a bad smell. Everyone turned to look at me, and I could feel the sting of their judgment before I even spoke. The silence was deafening. "Yes," I said quietly, "still working." "Good, good," my father continued, not really listening. "You know, Travis has this promotion and his team now, and he's really getting somewhere, unlike, well, some people." There it was, the wound, reopened, the familiar sting of my father's words. "Dad, stop," Travis said, looking at me with that half-hearted pity in his eyes, like he had done nothing wrong by letting this happen year after year. My father shrugged and took a swig of wine, undeterred. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. What was the point? They had erased me from their family narrative long ago. Their version of my story was one of failure, of a daughter who couldn't live up to the standards they set. So I stayed quiet, just as I always had. Let them live in their comfortable fiction. The meal continued, but I couldn't really taste the food. Every bite was bitter, every word my father said grating against my skin, but I didn't let it show. I didn't give them the satisfaction of seeing me hurt. That was always the goal, to blend into the background, to disappear in their eyes. But this time, something was different. I knew deep down that I wouldn't let it go. Not forever. I was done living in silence, done letting them erase me. As the evening wore on and my family went on with their conversations, I couldn't help but think of what they didn't know about me, about what they'd never let me share, what they refused to acknowledge. They had no idea that I was far more than the failure they painted me as. They didn't know what I had sacrificed, what I had accomplished behind the scenes. They had no idea about my military career, the things I had done, and the places I had been. But one day, that silence would break. One day, they would learn the truth. For now, I let them laugh and drink their wine. I let them think that I was invisible, because that was the price I had paid, to be the outcast, the forgotten one. But in that silence, a quiet power had been growing inside me, the kind of power that only silence can breed, the kind that would eventually demand to be heard. And when that day came, they would have no choice but to listen. As I cleared my plate and pushed it away, I felt the first flicker of hope. I wouldn't let them control my story anymore. One day I would reclaim it, and it would be louder than their lies. The house was different. When I returned from my latest assignment, I knew something wasn't right. It didn't feel like home anymore. It felt empty. I had spent years away, jumping from one mission to another, and when I finally had a break, I thought maybe things would feel different. Maybe I'd be welcomed back. Maybe there would be a family meal waiting for me, or at least a warm greeting. But there was nothing. I walked in through the front door, the creak of the old wood beneath my feet echoing in the silence. The house smelled faintly of dust and old furniture, things that hadn't been touched in a long time. I glanced around, trying to make sense of the strange emptiness. The family photos that used to line the hallway were gone. Not a single one of me remained. It was like I had never existed in this place. I turned the corner into the living room, hoping for some sign of familiarity. Instead, I found an unsettling scene. The couch, once soft and inviting, was now covered in plastic sheets. The TV stand, the one I had helped my father set up all those years ago, was replaced with something new, something cold and impersonal, a shiny modern set that didn't match the house at all. But it wasn't just the furniture. It was the complete absence of anything that felt like me. I looked up at the mantel, expecting to see the picture from my college graduation, the one my parents had proudly hung there for years. But it wasn't there. In its place were pictures of Travis and his family, pictures of him at his fancy promotion parties, shaking hands with important people I'd never heard of. I blinked, my throat tightening. The familiar sting of being erased hit me like a wave. This wasn't just a change in decor. This was an attempt to completely erase me from this family. My room, my old sanctuary, had been converted into a storage closet. Boxes of old clothes and forgotten trinkets filled the space where I had once slept. The bed I had spent countless nights in now, replaced with a sea of cardboard. I stood there, feeling the weight of it all. I had given my life to this family. Every moment away from my career, I had spent trying to prove that I belonged. I had tried to be the daughter they could be proud of, but now nothing was left. Nothing. Not a single trace that I had ever mattered. The silence in the house was deafening. It was like my absence had been planned. My own parents had decided that I was to be erased, removed from their lives without so much as a whisper. I dropped my bag by the door, my hands shaking as I walked through the house. I opened the door to the kitchen. No family photos on the fridge, no reminders of birthdays or holidays or lazy Sundays spent together, only the sterile emptiness of a house that no longer belonged to me. I went to the fridge, grabbed a bottle of water, and stood there staring at the empty kitchen. It was so quiet. I felt like a ghost. The only sound was the faint hum of the refrigerator in the background. But something inside me stirred. The quiet rage, the hurt I had been holding onto for years, began to rise. I had allowed this. I had allowed them to write me out of their history, to erase my existence, to make me disappear. But no more. I wasn't going to sit in silence anymore. I went back to the living room, sat down on the couch, and stared at the wall. The house was the same, but everything had changed. I had changed. The idea that I could just leave again, slip into the shadows, and disappear like they wanted, that wasn't an option anymore. I wasn't going to be forgotten again. Not this time. So, I did what I always did when I was faced with a challenge. Took control. I pulled out my phone and sent a text to my lawyer. I had been working on a plan for months, gathering the pieces of my story. It was time to take it all back. It was time for the truth to come out. I looked around the room one last time, at the family pictures that had replaced mine. I stood up, walking out of the living room and toward the front door. There was no point in staying. My parents had made it clear that I wasn't wanted here. But that didn't matter anymore. I grabbed my jacket, and as I walked out the door, I paused, looking back at the house. This would be the last time they got to control the narrative. I would reclaim my story, and they would have no choice but to listen. The news came to me through an old friend, someone who used to be part of my team back in the day. I hadn't heard from him in years, and when his message popped up on my phone, I almost didn't open it. But something told me I needed to know. Meredith, the message started, I heard through the grapevine that your family's been running around claiming you're dead. Thought you might want to know. I stared at the screen for a long moment, unsure of how to react. Dead? My mind scrambled for understanding. There had to be some mistake. But deep down, I knew it wasn't a mistake. Not anymore. I stood there, my mind racing. They had done it. My family had fabricated my death, erased me completely from their lives and rewritten their history. The words hit me hard, but I couldn't let them see how badly it affected me. For years, I had been living in the shadows of their lies. But now, this was something different. They had gone too far. They had crossed a line they couldn't come back from. I hadn't been home long before I saw the obituary. I tried to ignore it at first, convinced it couldn't be real. But then there it was. My name, my face, my supposed tragic end, all over the news. I had been killed in action, they said. It was the perfect story for a family who needed the sympathy of their peers. No one would question it. Everyone would mourn me. Except, of course, I wasn't dead. I wasn't the one who had died. My story had died. My family had buried me without even consulting me. But now that I had seen it, I couldn't let it slide. I couldn't let them rewrite my history any longer. I had worked hard for everything I had achieved. They'd never known, or worse, they had chosen to ignore it. I had served my country in silence, not for their approval, but because it was the right thing to do. I had earned every rank, every commendation, every medal that now hung in my forgotten locker. It wasn't enough for them to silence me. They had to erase me completely. I grabbed the stack of papers from my desk, detailed files, photographs, and letters from my old teammates, all of which I had carefully preserved. These were the pieces of my life they had denied. These were the reminders of what I had accomplished, what I had been through, and what I had given up. I wasn't going to let their lie stand. It was time. I made the call. Valerie, I said when she picked up. She had been the one to help me through the legal maze when I started thinking about exposing everything. I hadn't trusted anyone else with this kind of information. I need you to prepare a case. I've got everything I need to make them pay for what they've done. It's time to force the truth into the light. Valerie's voice was calm, measured. I thought we were waiting for the right moment, Meredith. Are you sure? I'm sure, I said. I can't wait anymore. They need to understand the cost of this, not just for me, but for everything they've taken from me. It's over. I'm not staying silent anymore. As I hung up the phone, I felt a strange sense of relief. I had been living under their shadow for so long, allowing them to control my narrative. allowing them to make me small. But now I was stepping into the light, ready to claim what was mine. I wasn't dead, I was very much alive, and I wasn't going to let them bury me again. I stood up and paced across the room, feeling the familiar sting of betrayal. But this time, there was power behind it. They had no idea what was coming. This was only the beginning. I was done being their ghost. The truth was about to rise from the ashes, and nothing could stop it now. 2 years had passed since I made the decision to confront my family, and I thought the worst of their betrayal was behind me. I had reclaimed my identity, exposed their lies, and even started to rebuild my life. But there was something darker lurking beneath the surface, something I didn't see coming. It started one quiet evening, a few months after I'd filed the first round of paperwork with Valerie. I was sitting at home in my small apartment, the kind of place I'd never had before. Peaceful, modest, and most importantly, mine. It was a far cry from the house I had grown up in, the one that had been stolen from me piece by piece. I hadn't heard from my parents in a while. They'd made their feelings clear. No contact, no apology. But when the letter arrived, I felt a sudden unease. It wasn't from a lawyer, which I had been expecting. It wasn't from anyone else related to my case. It was just a simple envelope, addressed to me in my mother's handwriting. I almost didn't open it, but something told me I needed to know. So I ripped it open and read the words, each one feeling like a slap to the face. Meredith, we have taken control of your financial accounts. You've been deemed mentally incompetent to manage your own affairs. Your assets have been transferred to us. This decision is final. Love, Mom, and Dad. I blinked at the words, the blood draining from my face. My heart skipped a beat, and for a moment, I couldn't breathe. Mentally incompetent? What the hell did they mean by that? I immediately thought of the paperwork Valerie had helped me put together, a detailed record of their lies, their financial mismanagement, and the web of deceit they had built around me. Everything I had worked for, everything I had sacrificed to make sure they didn't suffer, was now in their hands. This was no accident. This wasn't a simple misunderstanding. My parents had gone to great lengths to seize control of my assets, to make sure I couldn't touch anything that was rightfully mine. And it didn't stop there. I knew my father had always been a manipulator, but this was next-level exploitation. This wasn't just about taking money, it was about taking my life, my freedom. Everything I had worked for, every dollar I had earned on my own terms, had now been stolen from me. They had locked me out of my own future, all under the pretense that I was mentally incompetent. I could feel the rage rising inside me, the kind of rage that burned deep and hot, a quiet fury that I had buried for so long. I had trusted them, helped them, sacrificed for them, and they had turned it into a cruel joke. They had treated me like I was nothing, just someone to exploit. But this time, they had crossed a line they couldn't come back from. I picked up the phone and dialed Valerie's number. It rang twice before she answered. Meredith? Her voice was calm, as always, but I could hear the underlying tension in it. What's happened? They've taken my accounts, I said, my voice tight with disbelief. I don't know how, but they've somehow made it official. They've drained everything. I'm locked out. There was a long silence on the other end, and then Valerie's voice came back, cold and precise. This is what we've been preparing for. They've been planning this for a while, Meredith, but this doesn't change anything. We'll fight this. We'll make sure they pay for what they've done. I nodded, even though she couldn't see me. I'm done letting them get away with it. I've had enough of being their victim. I'll take back everything they've stolen, and when I'm done, they'll never touch my life again. Valerie's voice softened. We've got this. Don't worry, but we need to be careful. They'll try everything they can to keep you from taking control back. This is just the beginning. You need to be prepared for the long haul. I knew she was right. This wouldn't be a quick fix, but for the first time in years, I felt a sense of control, a sense of purpose. The rage inside me wasn't just anger anymore, it was fire, and I was going to use it to burn everything they had built. As I hung up the phone, I looked at the letter again. My parents had made their move, but I had no intention of letting them win. I wasn't going to let them manipulate me anymore. I wasn't going to let them continue to rewrite my story. I'd spent my entire life trying to fit into a mold they had made for me, trying to live up to their impossible expectations. But now, I was breaking free. I wasn't their puppet, I wasn't their ATM, and I wasn't their family's ghost anymore. I was going to take back my life, piece by piece, and I would make sure they never had the chance to control me again. The silence of the night was broken only by the sound of my phone buzzing again. This time, it was a text from my brother Travis. Meredith, I know things have been rough between us, but this isn't the way to handle it. Let us help you, please. I stared at the message, the bitterness and hurt rising inside me. He had always been the golden child, the one who never had to face the consequences of their actions, but not anymore. I deleted the message without responding. I didn't need his help. I didn't need anyone's help but my own. And when it was all over, I would have something he and the rest of them would never have: control of my own life. This was war, and I was ready to fight. I had spent the past few days seething, feeling the weight of betrayal like a lead weight on my chest. Every moment I spent dwelling on what my parents had done, the more I realized this was far from just a personal attack. It was a full-scale attempt to erase me, to rewrite everything I had ever accomplished, and to steal what was mine. The silence of my small apartment felt suffocating. I hadn't let anyone into my life for years, and now, with everything on the line, I couldn't afford to stay hidden anymore. It was time to take action. The first call I made was to Valerie. She had been on my side from the start, and now more than ever, I needed her expertise. Meredith, Valerie said when she answered. How's it going? I stood in front of the small desk I'd set up for myself, sifting through the paperwork I had been carefully accumulating for the past few months. It's time. I need you to file the paperwork. I've had enough of this. There was a pause on the line, but Valerie's response was quick and confident. I've been expecting this. We've got everything we need to expose them. I'll start working on the documents today, but you need to be ready for their retaliation. It won't be pretty. I could feel the knot in my stomach tighten. I'm ready. Whatever it takes. She let out a sharp breath. Okay, but Meredith, this is going to take time. We need to build an airtight case. Don't make any moves without me. Understood, I said, my voice steady. I'm done being patient. This ends now. I hung up the phone, but I didn't feel the usual fear that came with such decisions. This time, there was clarity in the air. They had crossed a line, and I wasn't going to let them get away with it. They would regret underestimating me. The next morning, I met Valerie in her office, a small but sleek space on the edge of town. I had been to her office before, but this time it felt different. I wasn't just a client. I was someone who was about to take back everything that had been stolen from me. Everything looks good, Valerie said, looking over the stack of files I brought in. We've got the forged documents, the financial records, the evidence that your parents tampered with your accounts. I nodded. They've been planning this for years. It's not just about money. It's about control. It's always been about control. She met my eyes. And they won't like losing it. We're going to hit them where it hurts. Financial fraud, abuse of power. This is going to be their worst nightmare. I took a deep breath. I want to make sure they know this isn't a game anymore. I want them to understand the full consequences of what they've done. Valerie smiled, a rare glimpse of approval in her eyes. You've got it. But remember, we need to move strategically. If we expose everything at once, it could backfire. We'll start small, get the ball rolling with the financials, and then move on to the rest. I leaned forward, my pulse quickening. Start small? I'm not here for small. I want them to know I'm coming for them, and I'm not stopping until I get everything back. Valerie nodded, but there was a flicker of concern in her eyes. We'll make sure everything is in place before we take the first step. Trust me, this isn't just about getting your money back. This is about dismantling the entire system they built. I glanced down at the papers in front of me, the financial statements, the letters, the receipts, proof of everything my family had tried to hide. They thought they could bury me under their lies, but they hadn't realized something important. I knew the truth, and I had the power to expose it. We'll start by getting the financial fraud filed, Valerie said, pulling out a pen and making a few quick notes. This is the first step. It'll put the pressure on them, force them to explain what they did with your assets. Good, I said, feeling the cold determination settle in my chest. Let's do it. Valerie worked quickly, drafting the necessary legal documents, while I sat back, watching as the plan began to take shape. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like the one being chased. I wasn't running from my family's lies anymore. I was chasing the truth, and I wasn't going to stop until I caught it. As the afternoon wore on, Valerie finished the paperwork and handed it to me. It's ready. We're filing this first thing tomorrow morning. They won't know what hit them. I stood up, a sense of power flooding through me. This is just the beginning, Valerie. Once this goes public, everything they've done to me will come crashing down, and they'll never be able to hide it again. She looked at me, her expression serious. It's a dangerous game you're playing, Meredith. Are you sure you're ready for everything that comes with it? I smiled, the weight of my decision settling in. I've been ready for this my whole life. As I walked out of her office, I felt lighter than I had in years. For the first time, I wasn't worried about what would happen next. I wasn't afraid of my family's retaliation. I was the one in control now, and nothing was going to stop me from reclaiming my life. It was time for the reckoning to begin. The morning was crisp, the kind of clear, bright day that felt like a promise. I stood outside the Department of Defense building, holding my breath for a moment as the weight of what I was about to do settled over me. Everything I had been working toward for the past few months was about to come to fruition. I had the truth in my hands, the truth they'd spent years trying to bury. They thought they could erase me, control my life, and make me a ghost. But the ghosts always find a way to haunt. And today, I was ready to haunt. The door to the building slid open with a quiet whoosh, and I stepped inside. I had never been one to make a dramatic entrance. But today, as I walked through the sleek, glass-walled lobby, my footsteps felt deliberate, measured. The room buzzed with conversations, but no one noticed me, not yet. I checked the time. My lawyer, Valerie, was already inside the meeting room, awaiting my arrival. She had been instrumental in preparing the case, making sure everything was perfectly documented. But this was my moment. I would take the final step, and the rest would follow. I walked through the halls of the Department of Defense, the heavy feeling of the mission pressing against my chest. My mind raced through the details of what I was about to do, presenting my evidence, demanding justice, and finally revealing everything that my family had tried to hide. The meeting room was just ahead. As I entered, I saw Valerie sitting at the table, a stack of documents neatly arranged before her. Across the table, a few officials sat, their eyes briefly glancing up at me, sizing me up, but they didn't know what they were in for. I closed the door behind me and stood still for a moment. The weight of everything, my military career, the lies, the years of silence, hung in the air, but I wasn't scared. This wasn't about fear anymore. This was about restoring the truth. Meredith, Valerie said softly, looking up from her papers. You're ready? I nodded, stepping forward. The officials were watching me now, their faces unreadable. They had no idea how deep this ran, how much they were about to learn. I am, I said, sitting down at the table. One of the officials, a man in his late 50s with a sharp jawline and a thin tie, cleared his throat. Ms. Cole, he began, his voice formal but with a hint of curiosity. We've reviewed the documents you've provided, but I have to admit, I'm still unclear as to what exactly you're asking for. Are you here to present evidence of fraud or... I cut him off with a calm but firm voice. I'm here to expose a lie that my family has been living for years, one that has affected my life, my career, and my very identity. And now I'm going to make sure it ends. I could feel the tension in the room shift, a quiet ripple of surprise passing through the officials. They weren't prepared for this. None of them were. They thought this was just another routine case. They had no idea how personal this was for me. I laid out the files in front of me. Every document, every piece of evidence was carefully organized. There were the forged financial records, proof of my parents taking control of my accounts, the falsified medical evaluations, the letters from family members claiming I was dead, and the most damning of all, the official military records that my family had hidden from the world. This is my truth, I said, sliding the documents across the table. I'm not asking for sympathy. I'm not asking for a reward. I'm asking for you to correct the record. I want my name back. I want my service recognized for what it is. The room was silent for a moment as they flipped through the papers, their expressions hardening as they realized the depth of the situation. They had underestimated me, and now they were seeing the evidence, everything my family had tried to bury. The man who had spoken earlier looked up at me, his expression shifting from skepticism to something closer to respect. Ms. Cole, he said slowly, this is more than we anticipated. I didn't respond. There was nothing left to say. The truth was all that mattered now. Another official, a woman in her 40s with dark, sharp eyes, leaned forward. This is going to cause a lot of disruption, she said quietly. Not just for your family, but for the people involved in this cover-up. Are you prepared for that? I nodded. I've been preparing for this my entire life. There was another pause, this one heavier than the last. The officials exchanged glances, and for the first time, I saw the shift in their demeanor. They weren't just hearing the words, I was making them feel the weight of it. The man who had spoken earlier cleared his throat again. We'll need time to process this, Ms. Cole, but I'll be honest with you. What you've presented here is serious, very serious. I'm aware, I said, my voice steady. But you don't need time to process it. What you need to do is fix the mistake my family made. You need to restore my name, my career, and the truth of what I've done for this country. There was a long silence, and I could feel the tension in the room building. They knew I was right. I had presented them with undeniable evidence, and they had no choice but to act. After what felt like an eternity, the woman spoke again. We'll get to work on this immediately. I can't promise it will be quick, but we'll begin the process of correcting the record. I leaned back in my chair, my hands folded in front of me. That's all I ask. As they began discussing the next steps, I stood up, gathering my things. I had come here to make sure my family's lies didn't just affect me anymore. Now it was time for them to face the consequences of what they had done. I didn't need their approval. I didn't need their acknowledgement. All I needed was for the truth to be known. And when I left that room, I knew I had taken the first step toward reclaiming my life. The lies were crumbling, and nothing could stop me now. It was over. 2 weeks had passed since my confrontation with the Department of Defense, and the fallout had started to spread. I knew my family was scrambling. They had to be. The truth, once buried so carefully, was now coming to light, and they had no idea how to handle it. I wasn't expecting an apology. I wasn't even expecting them to acknowledge what I had done. But the silence was deafening. I sat on my couch in the small cottage by the water, the calm waves outside almost mocking the storm that was brewing in the world I had left behind. My phone had been silent for days, but today the notifications started flooding in. A text from my brother, Travis. Meredith, what the hell is going on? Mom and Dad are freaking out. This is going too far. Please just come home and fix it. I stared at the message for a moment, the same mix of anger and exhaustion swirling inside me. The words, the desperation, all of it felt like déjà vu. They didn't care when they erased me, didn't care when they left me in the shadows, but now that the truth was coming for them, now they were panicking, I didn't respond. There was nothing left to say to them. I had given them years of chances to acknowledge me, to see me as something other than their financial support and emotional punching bag. Now, they would have to deal with the consequences of their choices. Another message came through from my mother, this time in all caps. Meredith, please, you have no idea what you're doing. We can't survive without you. The house is at risk. Your father is sick with worry, and now your brother's promotion is on the line. You need to stop this before it's too late. I felt a bitter smile tug at my lips. How typical. They always played the victim when they needed something. But I wasn't falling for it anymore. Instead, I set my phone aside and turned my attention back to the documents on my desk. The quiet hum of my small space was a welcome contrast to the chaos that was unfolding around me. The Treasury Department had already started investigating the fraudulent transactions my family had been involved in, and now they were digging into the Cole Legacy Foundation, the one my parents had used to launder stolen money. I had expected this. In fact, I had planned for it. The foundation was a front, my parents' way of making sure they would always have something to fall back on, even if I disappeared from the picture. But now, the walls were closing in, and they couldn't hide behind their lies anymore. I had made the quiet decision not to confront them directly, not to meet them halfway as they begged for my help. This wasn't about making peace with them. This was about seeing to it that the truth was fully exposed. They had built an empire on my silence, and now it was crumbling. There would be no more pretending, no more lies. I leaned back in my chair, allowing myself a moment of satisfaction. This wasn't the loud, dramatic victory I had once imagined. There were no public confrontations, no fiery speeches. Instead, it was unfolding quietly, steadily, like the steady rhythm of the waves outside my window. I took a sip of my coffee, savoring the bitterness of it. Then, my phone buzzed again. This time, it was from the Treasury Department, a formal notification. We have completed the initial audit of the Cole Legacy Foundation's financial records. Based on our findings, we are requesting the immediate restitution of misappropriated funds. We are also pursuing further investigation into the financial manipulations connected to Ms. Meredith Cole's estate. I smiled. Finally, the consequences were catching up to them. The truth was no longer something they could hide from or sweep under the rug. The weight of everything they had stolen was now coming down on their heads, and there was nothing they could do to stop it. I didn't feel sorry for them. I didn't feel guilty. If anything, I felt lighter than I had in years. The silence I had once feared, the one that had felt like a crushing weight, now felt like a breath of fresh air. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't holding my breath. I wasn't waiting for their approval or forgiveness. I was just living on my terms. I glanced down at my phone again. There was another message, this time from my lawyer, Valerie. We've received confirmation from the authorities. Your family's fraudulent activities are being officially investigated. It's time to take this to the next level. Your story is about to become public knowledge. I sat back, absorbing the news. It was official now. My name was no longer just something that lived in the shadows. It was about to be everywhere. The media, the public, the people who had once written me off. They would know the truth, and I was ready for it. Ready for them to finally see me for who I really was. Not the ghost they had tried to erase, but the woman who had worked her way to the top, silently, steadily, and without their help. There was no going back now. The quiet victory was mine, and I had earned it. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a golden glow over the water outside, I felt a calm settle over me. I didn't need to prove anything to anyone anymore. The truth had already spoken for itself. The storm had come, and I had weathered it. And now, I was free. It had been months since everything started to fall apart for my family. The investigation, the media coverage, the legal battles, everything had come crashing down around them. But in the quiet aftermath of their downfall, I had found peace. I had moved far away from the chaos, settling into a small cottage by the water, far from the city and even farther from the family who had erased me from their lives. It was a modest home, but it was mine, and it was enough. I didn't need their approval anymore. I didn't need their empty apologies or their shallow promises. I had reclaimed my story, my life, and my dignity. They had no place in it anymore. But despite everything I had done to break free from their grasp, I couldn't shake the feeling that there was one final piece of my past I needed to confront. I had kept my distance for so long, but I hadn't fully closed the door. There was one last thing I had to do, one final act of reclamation. I drove to my old hometown that afternoon. The streets looked the same, but they felt different. I hadn't been here in so long, not since I had cut ties with everything that had once held me back. The memories flooded back as I passed the old school, the park where I used to play as a kid, the small shops lining the main street. But nothing felt the same anymore, not after everything I had learned, after everything I had been through. When I pulled into the driveway of the house where I had spent so many years being invisible, I didn't feel anger or resentment. I felt nothing. Just the weight of what had happened here, what had been taken from me, and what I had taken back. The house loomed in front of me, the same house where my parents had tried to bury me, the same house where my life had been erased. It was silent, just like it had been when I left. The windows, once full of light and warmth, now felt cold and empty. I stepped out of the car, the gravel crunching beneath my feet as I walked toward the front door. I could hear the faint hum of the air conditioner inside, but there was no sign of life. My heart didn't race. I didn't feel the need to knock. I just stood there for a moment, taking in the house that had never truly been mine. I took a deep breath and opened the door. It creaked the way it always had as I stepped inside. The smell of dust and old furniture hit me immediately. Everything was exactly the same, yet it wasn't. This house had never truly been a home to me. It had been a place where I had been tolerated, where my accomplishments had been ignored, where I had been nothing but a financial resource and a convenient scapegoat. The memories of my family, of my father's dismissive glances, of my mother's weak attempts at peacekeeping, flooded my mind. They had erased me, yes, but they had never truly understood me. And in the end, they would have to live with the consequences of that. I walked through the rooms, touching nothing. The living room, the kitchen, the hallway. I saw the old photos I had once been a part of, now replaced with new ones of Travis, of the family they had kept, the one they had kept alive while pushing me into the shadows. And then I came to the mantle, the place where my graduation photo used to hang. Now it was empty, save for the new family portraits. I didn't feel the pang of loss I expected. No. Instead, I felt a quiet resolve. This was my closure. I didn't need this house anymore. I didn't need their approval. I had already rebuilt myself, brick by brick, in a way they would never understand. The phone call from Travis came just as I was about to leave. I didn't look at the screen. I already knew what he would say. I had no interest in hearing the lies anymore. I let it ring out, and for the first time, I didn't feel any guilt. I turned and left the house without a second glance. The door clicked shut behind me, but I didn't look back. As I drove away, the weight of the past seemed to lift off my shoulders. I didn't need their validation. I didn't need to prove myself to them. I had done it all on my own, and I had done it for myself. I pulled up to the small cottage by the water, just as the sun began to set. The soft colors of the evening sky filled the horizon, and for the first time in a long while, I felt at peace. The world was quiet again, but this time it felt like freedom. I didn't have to explain myself to anyone. I didn't need to justify my choices. The truth had already been spoken, and the world was beginning to see it. I had reclaimed my story, and that was enough.